Hello everyone, welcome to my shop. In this video I'm going to be talking about how to diagnose and replace a failed wheel bearing in a 350Z. Process should be the same on a G35 or at least the coupe with the two-wheel drive. Not terribly difficult, doesn't require any real specialty tools, especially if you're using the standard studs that come included with the hub. I'm going to go over how to actually swap out because I run extended studs on my car, but I'm going to move the camera, we'll talk about diagnosing, and then we'll go into the replacement. First, let's talk how to diagnose a failed wheel bearing. On the 350Z, the front wheel bearings are fairly weak. They're not too bad if you're just street driving the car doing normal things. When you go up to these big 18 by 11 Koenig wheels like I've got running 295 tires and track the car regularly, these front wheel bearings just fail regularly. If I get a season out of a set, I'm doing pretty good. Typically this will present in a couple of ways. You may hear a whirring or kind of a grinding noise when you make a turn. It'll typically be more present in one direction than the other. That may help you tell which side's gone bad. The other big tell is you'll actually have play. It's a little hard to see in here, but if you grab it 12 and 6, there should be very little play this direction, little to none, and I clearly have some, and I can also see the rotor moving as well. So I know this is bad. The other thing is if you are tracking the car, you will get what they call pad knock as this wheel bearing gets worse. And what happens is as this wheel moves, the rotor actually moves as well, and it'll actually push your brake pads out, especially if you've got the Brembo package on your car. And then when you come into a braking zone and you hit the brakes, and you don't have brakes because the pads actually aren't against the rotor. So that's a really good indicator if you are somebody who is tracking your car that it's time to replace your wheel bearings. So I'm going to go ahead and get this wheel off, and then we'll start talking about the next steps. After removing the wheel, we need to start preparing to remove the brake caliper so we can remove the rotor. If you have OEM style Brembo lines, i.e. two-piece lines either from the factory or the braided stainless ones like Z1 cells, you do need to remove this bracket as well as a bolt here on the back side. These are all 12mm fasteners. I'm going to go ahead and remove these, and then we'll work on getting rid of the caliper. Now that the brake line is loose, the next step is going to be to remove the caliper itself. We're going to remove the two caliper mounting bolts here. They are 22mm fasteners. They are quite tight. It might help to actually turn the steering wheel away so that you can get an impact in here on this. So go ahead and get those removed, and then we'll secure the caliper out of the way and work on the next step. I've now removed the caliper and the rotor and set the rotor out of the way. The last step that we're going to do before we actually go to remove the bearing is there is an ABS line over here. It's got a 12mm bolt on it. We're going to go ahead and remove this and just get it out of the way. You can just let it hang. The last step in removing the wheel bearing is to remove these four 17mm fasteners. We got two high, two low. Do not fully remove these. You want to back them out part way. We're going to use them in a hammer to knock the bearing out in case it gets stuck. At this point, I've got all the fasteners loose. I've actually removed the upper and lower fasteners. The lower fastener actually does hit the knuckle if you had the wheel straight, so I'm just going to leave it there. It's no longer bolted in. Removing the hub itself can be a challenge, especially if it's the first time you've ever done it, or if you live and drive your car year-round where it might get exposed to salt. In my case, mine have come on and off so many times. Mine are easy to get on and off. If for some reason you have trouble getting this off once you remove the bolts, you can take a hammer and hit on on any of the fasteners if they're only partially threaded in, and that will drive the hub out. The other option you've got is to hit on the back of the hub or top and bottom of the hub to try and get it to break free. Bearing in mind, you do normally have a brake dust shield here. Mine has been cut down due to track use, but this will also want to come off with the hub. With all the fasteners out of the way and the hub loose, as I said, mine kind of works its way right out. As you remove this, your dust shield is going to drop, so if you've got two hands free, you're going to want to catch that as well. Now is a good time to clean up the inside of this bore, make sure there's no major corrosion in here. You could use a little bit of really fine sandpaper or even just like a wire brush, but you do want to make sure that this is good and clean. You might spray this whole area down with some brake cleaner as well while you're in here. Now before I Before I put this hub back on, I am going to put a little bit of anti-seize just on the bore on the inside here. I don't want to get any on the face because that'll affect the clamping of the bearing, but this will help in the future for the next time I have to replace this wheel bearing, or the next time somebody has to replace this wheel bearing. It'll make it a lot easier to get this bearing back out so it doesn't get stuck. The next step will be to reinstall or realign your dust shield, or in my case, what acts as a spacer for my dust shield. In case you lost track of which side is which, fortunately this is a non-symmetric hole pattern, so it can only go on one way. You can't put it on 180 degrees out, but you've got some stamping here, and the stamping is embossed outward towards you. That is the appropriate way, appropriate, inside outside. I've got one bolt in there that I'm going to use to kind of hold, and I'm going to put another bolt in from the back side just to help hold stuff in place as I load the bearing. Next step will be to actually install the bearing. As I said, this is not a symmetric hole pattern, so this is only going to go on one way. After getting all 4 bolts snugged up, I'm going to go ahead and torque these. The torque spec is 88 Newton meters or 65 foot-pounds. I'm going to go ahead and do top, bottom, front, back, kind of like a star pattern. Go ahead and get those torqued, and then we'll go to the next step. Next is the very important step to remember to reinstall your ABS sensor. And this sensor is only, torque spec is only 10 foot-pounds, so not super tight. Just get it snugged in and make sure that it's aligned properly. Before I reinstall the rotor, I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize only on this hub, around the outside of this hub. It'll just make sure that the brake doesn't stick to it and that the wheel doesn't stick to it later. Do not get it on the face or on the wheel studs. That's how you risk breaking studs and causing wheels to come off. Next up, we're going to install the rotor. One challenge you may run into if you do run these extra long studs is if the studs aren't pressed in perfectly straight. Sometimes you do have a little bit of work to make sure that the rotor gets in. Now that I've got the rotor in place, I've actually tightened one of the lug nuts down on it just a little bit to help keep this in place so that I can work the caliper and brake pads back on. Once the caliper's on, we'll move the camera around and we'll go over tightening the caliper back on. Next up, I'm going to work on aligning the caliper with the 2 bolts. Be very careful with this. You're threading into aluminum. You don't want to risk cross-threading this. Also make sure that these threads are clean and dry. Do not put Loctite or anti-seize or anything on either of these bolts, or you're asking for trouble and you may strip the threads out. Once the 2 bolts are snugged up, the torque spec for these is 152 Newton meters or 112 foot-pounds. The last step, assuming you have the Brembo brakes or a more factory style brake, is to reattach this bracket, and there's a bracket on the back side. We've got 2 smaller bolts and a longer bolt. The 2 smaller bolts go to the knuckle here and here, and the longer bolt comes in from the back side. These are small, low torque, something like 10 foot-pounds, so you don't need to go crazy. And then the last step is to simply reinstall the wheel. When you're done, all you got to do now is just torque your wheel lugs. It's 108 Newton meters or 80 foot-pounds. It is a good idea to, after you've driven the car for a little while, especially if you've replaced the studs like I did, to go ahead and torque check this again after 100 or 200 miles. Other than that, this project's done. Pretty easy. It's not too difficult. Doesn't really require any specialty tooling other than a couple torque wrenches. If you're not replacing the wheel studs like I was, this is super easy. They come with new studs in them, and if you're just using the standard studs, it's literally just 4 bolts off, 4 bolts on, and that's it. So pretty easy. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll link this video to the rear one that I did earlier so that you've got that as well. And thanks for watching.